I never thought my own son's fiancée would erase me from his wedding like I was a mistake she could delete. I never imagined Jordan would stand by while Kelsey and her mother scrubbed my name from the guest list and told me to watch from a hotel TV. But what they didn't know was that life had left me one last card to play, the kind that could unlock the very doors they slammed in my face. Get ready, because this isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. Comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. My name is Rosa Delgado and I am 66 years old, living in the dry, sun-soaked city of Albuquerque, New Mexico. I spent most of my life working as a trauma nurse, which meant long nights under harsh fluorescent lights, blood on my scrubs more often than I care to remember, and more prayers whispered in hospital hallways than in any church pew. I've seen life at its first gasp and at its last sigh. And through it all, one thing kept me steady: my son Jordan. Jordan was my only child, my whole reason to keep pushing through double shifts and aching bones. His father walked out when Jordan was barely 3, leaving me to stitch together a life for us with nothing but grit, stubbornness, and a heart that believed love could carry a person further than money. It wasn't easy, but Jordan grew up strong, smart, and kind. At least that's what I thought for most of his life. Now, I'm telling you this story because even after surviving everything life threw at me in the ear, I wasn't prepared for the kind of pain that comes when your own child allows someone else to erase you. It's a wound that doesn't bleed on the outside, but festers deep inside where no one can see. 2 weeks before his wedding, I got an email from Kelsey Hart, my son's fiancée. A cold little message that made my stomach twist before I even clicked it open. The subject line was simple: wedding guest list update. My hands shook as I opened it, and I remember the way the light from my old laptop screen flickered against the kitchen table like it was warning me. Inside was a neatly worded note that said, in so many polite words, that I was no longer invited. Not just shuffled to the back row. Not just asked to sit quietly. Completely erased. The reason? According to Kelsey, I made her anxious. And according to her mother, Deirdre Hart, the guest list needed to be curated. Curated. Like I was some old relic in a museum that didn't fit the theme of their exhibit. I sat there in my little Adobe-style home, staring at that email while the swamp cooler hummed against the desert heat, and I swear for a moment I couldn't even breathe. All I could think was, how could my son allow this? How could he let them cut me out of his life's biggest day? Jordan called me later that evening, his voice strained and awkward, like he knew how wrong it was but didn't have the backbone to stand up to them. "Mom," he said, "please understand. Kelsey just gets stressed. It'll be easier this way. We'll celebrate together another time." Another time? What other time is there for a mother to watch her son walk down the aisle? For me to see the boy I carried in my arms stand tall as a husband? There is no other time. That was the moment. And he was letting it happen without me. I hung up the phone that night with my heart cracked in a way I didn't think was possible. I had held dying hands, listened to last words, comforted strangers in their final minutes. But the betrayal of being told by my own son and his fiancée that I was not welcome at their wedding, that felt like death while still being alive. And yet, as broken as I was, a fire began to stir inside me. The kind of fire that comes when life tries to tell you you're powerless. I knew one thing. I wasn't about to let my story end with me sitting at home, watching my son's wedding from a distance like some unwelcome shadow. But this wasn't finished. That was the moment I decided I was going to Savannah, Georgia anyway. Maybe I wouldn't get through the front door. Maybe they'd sneer and shove me aside. But I had carried Jordan through life when no one else would, and I wasn't about to let a curated guest list erase me. I didn't know then what fate had in store, but I felt it, like a storm humming on the horizon. Before everything fell apart, my life with Jordan felt like a long road where every mile was paved with sacrifice. I was only 20 when I had him, and by the time I was 30, I was already working 3 shifts at the hospital just to keep the lights on in our little apartment in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I used to pack him into the car at dawn, drop him at a neighbor's before school, and then head straight to the ER. Some nights I'd come home so exhausted I'd collapse right on the couch, still in my scrubs, the smell of antiseptic clinging to my skin. But whenever I opened my eyes and saw Jordan asleep in his bed, his chest rising and falling, his little fingers curled around that ragged teddy bear we bought at a thrift store, I knew every hour, every ache in my bones was worth it. He was my miracle, my reason for every sacrifice. When he grew older, he showed a sharpness, a hunger for learning that made me believe he'd go further than I ever could. I pushed him through school, saved every spare dime, and by the time he was accepted into grad school in Austin, Texas, I packed up my old Chevy and drove him there myself. I remember sitting on the curb outside his first apartment, swallowing back tears as I hugged him goodbye, telling myself this was what all those sleepless nights had been for. That was where Kelsey came into the picture. She was polished, blonde, always put together. The kind of girl who grew up in big houses with sweeping lawns and mothers who spent afternoons at country clubs. When I first met her, she smiled politely, but her eyes scanned me up and down like she was inspecting a crack in the wall. I was wearing my good dress, the one I'd bought years earlier at a consignment store, and I could feel her gaze lingering on the worn hem. Her mother, Deirdre, wasn't much better. A buckhead lady through and through, with pearls around her neck and a voice that carried the weight of old money. She introduced herself like she was doing me a favor by shaking my hand. I'll never forget her words the first Thanksgiving I joined them in Savannah. "Well, Rosa, you certainly did a fine job raising Jordan, considering." Considering what? Considering I wasn't born into her world of polished silver and monogrammed napkins? Still, I told myself love would smooth out the edges. I wanted so badly for Jordan to be happy that I bit my tongue whenever they made their little comments. Like when Kelsey corrected my Spanish pronunciation at a family dinner, smirking like it was a joke. Or when Deirdre made a point of telling me which fork to use at a restaurant in front of everyone. They treated me like some project to polish, and I thought if I just endured it quietly, eventually they'd see my heart. So I tried. I saved up for their honeymoon, stashing bills into an envelope hidden in my sewing box. I told Jordan I'd cover part of the rehearsal dinner, even though it meant taking out a small loan against my car. I wanted them to feel my love in every way I could offer it. But even as I poured myself into helping, I could feel the tension tightening around me like a rope. Kelsey had this way of looking at Jordan when I spoke, as though silently asking him to control me. And Jordan, my sweet boy who once ran to me with scraped knees and wide-open arms, began to shrink under that gaze. He'd say, "Mom, maybe don't mention this," or, "Mom, try not to bring that up around Kelsey's family." Small cuts, each one a little deeper than the last. I told myself it was just wedding stress, that young couples get caught up in appearances. But deep down there was a chill I couldn't shake. I felt like an outsider in my own son's life, watching from the sidelines as Kelsey and Deirdre slowly pulled him further from me. I didn't know then just how far they'd go. I didn't know I'd soon be erased altogether. But the signs were there like cracks in the foundation of a house. And I kept telling myself if I just stayed patient, if I just kept giving, somehow love would be enough to hold it all together. It happened at what should have been a happy occasion, Kelsey's bridal shower in Austin, Texas. The air was heavy with the smell of flowers and perfume, a little too sweet for the cramped event hall they had rented. Everything was dressed in blush pink and ivory. Satin ribbons, crystal flutes filled with champagne, and cupcakes so polished they looked like they belonged in a magazine. I sat quietly at one of the back tables, sipping weak coffee from a paper cup, my gift resting on my lap, a quilt I had made with my own hands. Every patch stitched from scraps of Jordan's childhood. His old soccer jersey, a square from his baby blanket, even a piece of the dress I wore to his high school graduation. I thought it would be something sentimental, a way to show Kelsey that my love wasn't measured in money but in history. Then Deirdre Hart swept into the room like a queen inspecting her court. She carried a rolled-up seating chart, and with a sharp clap of her hands, everyone quieted down. I felt my stomach tighten. She unrolled that chart across the gift table, her pearls glinting in the fluorescent lights, and with a thin smile she began pointing out who sat where. This row for Kelsey's college friends. This section for the partners from her father's firm. And here, she tapped the glossy sheet with a manicured nail. This is for immediate family only. I scanned the chart, expecting to see my name nestled near Jordan's. But it wasn't there. Not in the front rows. Not in the back. Not anywhere. I raised my hand, my voice trembling just enough to betray the storm I felt inside. "Excuse me, Deirdre, but I don't see my name listed." The room went silent. A few of the women shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Deirdre's smile never wavered. She gave a soft laugh, the kind of laugh that wasn't laughter at all, and said, "Oh, Rosa, don't worry yourself. We've kept the ceremony to immediate family. We don't want the space too crowded with extended relations." Extended relations. That was the phrase she used, like I was some distant cousin or neighbor, not the woman who had given birth to the groom. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Kelsey herself stepped forward, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "It's not personal," she said with that sweet false tone that made my skin crawl. "We just want everything to feel curated, controlled. It's for the best. Curated, controlled. Like their wedding was a photo shoot, and I was the cracked face they didn't want in the frame." The humiliation burned through me, hot and sharp. I could feel the eyes of strangers on me, pitying me, judging me. My hands shook as I clutched the quilt on my lap, my fingers pressing so tightly against the stitches I thought the fabric might tear. I left the shower early, my gift still in my arms, and drove back to my motel room in silence. That night, as the neon sign outside my window buzzed and flickered, I tried to convince myself it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe it was temporary. Maybe Jordan would step in and fix it. But a few days later, the final blow landed. An email arrived, not from Jordan but from Kelsey. A glossy, digital invitation update. The password to the wedding portal had been changed. My name had been deleted entirely. At the bottom of the message, in polished script, was the line that cut deepest of all. "Attendance is limited to protect the couple's brand." Brand. That's what my love for my son had been reduced to, a blemish on their brand. I sat at my kitchen table in Albuquerque, staring at that glowing screen, the desert wind rattling the windows. The quilt lay folded across the chair beside me, its bright patches of memory mocking me in the dim light. That was the moment the betrayal became real. Not a misunderstanding. Not a mistake. A choice. My son, my only son, was letting them erase me. The night I arrived in Savannah, Georgia, the air felt heavier than the desert air I was used to back home in Albuquerque. The streets were lined with old oaks draped in Spanish moss, and the city hummed with a beauty I couldn't enjoy. Every corner, every brick road felt like a reminder that I had come all this way not as a mother of the groom, but as an outsider peering through the glass. The venue, the Azalea House, was a grand white-columned estate just outside of the city, dripping with charm like it had been lifted out of a southern postcard. I drove past it once just to see it with my own eyes. Vendors bustled around the grounds, setting up tents and floral arches, laughter carrying across the courtyard as if joy itself had been rented by the hour. I sat in my rental car with the windows cracked, listening, knowing none of that laughter was meant for me. I thought about leaving the quilt at the front gate with a note, but something in my chest tightened. No, they didn't deserve even that part of me, not when they'd already decided I was unworthy of a seat. That night I checked into a cheap roadside motel in Macon, an hour out of Savannah. The wallpaper was peeling, the carpet smelled faintly of mildew, and the hum of the air conditioner was the only sound keeping me from drowning in silence. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling fan, its blades turning so slowly I thought it might stop altogether. That's when the weight of it all hit me. I had spent decades patching my life together so my son could have more than I ever did. Every calloused hand, every sleepless night, every dollar saved, all of it was supposed to lead to this proud moment where I watched him walk into his future. And instead I was lying in a motel off the highway, erased from his story like I had never mattered. I cried that night, the kind of cry that comes from the pit of your stomach, the kind you can't control even if you bite your lip until it bleeds. It wasn't just sadness, it was humiliation, loneliness, betrayal. My own child had stood by and let them strike me from his life's most important day. And worse, he had asked me to understand. The next morning, puffy-eyed and hollow, I wandered into the motel's little cafe for stale coffee. At the counter, two women in aprons were whispering while they waited for their orders. They were caterers, I could tell by the branded van parked outside. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but their voices carried in the quiet room. "The Azalea House again," one of them said, rolling her eyes. "They're 3 months behind and the bank's about to sell the note. If they don't fix it fast, no wedding will stick there much longer." My ears pricked. I pretended to stir sugar into my coffee, my hands shaking just enough to spill a few grains. "The bank's shopping it now," the other woman whispered. "Somebody's gonna snatch it up and then whoever holds the note will call the shots." Those words sat in my chest like a thunderclap. Whoever holds the note will call the shots. Later that afternoon, I sat in my motel room with my laptop perched on the wobbly desk, the screen casting a cold glow over the dim space. My fingers hovered as I searched through county records, public filings, anything I could dig up. And there it was, a lien filed against the Azalea House. Mortgage distressed. Loan being sold. For a moment I just stared at it, my heart pounding louder than the fan overhead. Could it really be? Could the very place they had used to humiliate me, to erase me, be standing on shaky ground? I thought about walking away. I thought about how tired I was, how old bones and old heartbreaks shouldn't chase after miracles. But then I remembered all the years I had told Jordan that when the world tries to lock you out, you find another door. And here in black and white on my screen was a door I never expected. That night, I picked up the phone and called a man I hadn't spoken to in years. Eugene Cho, a former ICU patient of mine from Santa Fe who had once told me, "If you ever need a friend in banking, you call me." When he answered, groggy but polite, I told him everything. My voice shook as I explained what I had found, how I had been erased, and how the Azalea House was in trouble. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Rosa, if you really want this, I can help you make it happen." That was the moment the tide began to turn. At my lowest, when I thought I had nothing left, life slipped me a secret. The power to step back into the story they tried to write me out of. The next morning, I woke up with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The motel's curtains let in a sliver of gray light, and for once I didn't just lie there staring at the ceiling. My hands itched with purpose. I had been given a path and I wasn't going to let fear or fatigue close it. Eugene called me back after speaking with his contacts. His voice was steady, professional, but I could hear the undercurrent of disbelief when he said, "Rosa, the loan is real. It's distressed and the bank's eager to offload it. If you want, you could buy the note at a discount. It won't make you the owner of the property, but it will make you the lender, the one with approval rights over events like that wedding." I sat there in silence for a moment, staring at my trembling hands. A nurse turned landlord of sorts. It sounded absurd, like a dream stitched together with mismatched threads. But then I thought of Kelsey's smug smile, Deirdre's cold laugh, and Jordan's silence on the phone. I thought of that quilt folded in my bag, the one that held the history of my sacrifices. And suddenly it didn't feel absurd at all. It felt like fate. Eugene helped me form a small holding company. We called it Abuela Sage LLC, his idea. "Abuela Sage," he said with a chuckle, "because you've got more wisdom than all of them put together." With his guidance, I filed paperwork, signed documents, and wired money from the savings I'd quietly built over the years. Money I had meant for my retirement, for hospital bills I prayed wouldn't come too soon. It wasn't easy to part with, but I reminded myself, sometimes dignity is worth more than comfort. Within days it was done. My bid had been accepted. The bank had washed its hands, and suddenly I was the new lender of record for the Azalea House. I sat with the contract in front of me, the pages thick and formal, the black ink heavy with authority. The covenants were clear. Any major event at the venue required lender oversight for occupancy, safety compliance, and payment of arrears. Without it, no doors could open. I ran my fingers over the paper, the way you might trace the lines of a map before starting a journey. For the first time since that email telling me I wasn't welcome, I felt power stir in my chest. Quiet, steady power. But I knew better than to rush. This wasn't something to brandish recklessly. No, this was leverage, and leverage worked best when hidden until the moment it mattered most. So I kept my secret close, telling no one. Not Jordan. Not Kelsey. Not even my closest friend back in Albuquerque. Instead, I began preparing in silence. I called the venue manager under the guise of reviewing compliance, asking pointed questions about fire codes, head counts, and overdue vendor payments. The poor man stammered through answers, clearly unaccustomed to a new lender taking such interest. I listened carefully, piecing together the shaky foundation beneath the wedding's glossy surface. Meanwhile, I studied their vendor contracts. Public filings, news clippings, anything I could find online. The flowers, the catering, even the sponsorships they had bragged about at the bridal shower. Each one tied back to the venue's ability to satisfy its lender, me. And all the while, Kelsey and Deirdre went on as if the world was theirs to control. Social media posts flaunting exclusive details of the wedding. Hashtags dripping with perfection. I watched quietly, knowing they were standing on a stage I now held the power to light, or darken. I didn't do it for vengeance. Not exactly. What I wanted was simple. My rightful place as Jordan's mother on his wedding day. To sit in the front row, to see him smile as he promised his life to another, and to know that all those years of sacrifice hadn't been erased. So I waited. Like a patient nurse watching a fragile heartbeat, I waited for the right moment to reveal what I had done. Because sometimes, the only way to heal a wound that deep is to let those who cut you see just how sharp your own hands can be. And soon enough, the cracks in their perfect world began to show. Savannah was glowing that week. Magnolias blooming, tourists laughing on riverboats, the city alive with charm. But inside the world of the Azalea House, tension rippled like a storm cloud creeping across a summer sky. The first notices went out under my name, plain, professional lender communications reminding the venue of its obligations. Updated occupancy caps. Safety inspections. Immediate settlement of arrears before final events could proceed. Nothing harsh, nothing personal. Just the kind of paperwork that makes people sweat when they've been skating too close to the edge. I stayed quiet, volunteering at a church kitchen on Barnard Street during the days, ladling soup and folding chairs, blending into the rhythm of strangers. At night, I checked my email, watching the ripples from my actions start to disturb the waters. The first sign came when the florist, a woman with a small shop near Forsyth Park, refused to load her vans until she was assured the venue was solvent. "I've been burned before," she told them, her voice sharp over the phone. "No check, no flowers." Then the caterer called, demanding cash in advance after hearing rumors of the mortgage being sold. Sponsors, those glossy companies Kelsey bragged about, started pulling out, not wanting their brand tied to a venue with whispers of instability. Jordan called me one evening, his voice lined with worry. "Mom," he said, "the venue's been sending all these compliance updates. Kelsey's freaking out, they're saying layouts need revisions, guest counts adjusted. Do you know anything about this?" I held the phone to my ear, listening to the panic in my son's voice, the same boy who once cried because he couldn't find me in the grocery store aisle. My heart clenched, but my voice stayed calm. "Jordan," I said softly, "sometimes when people build castles too fast, the foundation doesn't hold. You just stay steady, Mijo. Everything will come to light soon." He sighed, worn down. "I don't know how much more stress Kelsey can take. Deirdre's already furious. They're threatening to move the rehearsal dinner to Tybee Island, but even that's hitting roadblocks with deposits." I hummed gently, not giving myself away. Just breathe, I told him. The truth has a way of finding its own path. Meanwhile, Kelsey and Deirdre scrambled. They made frantic calls to vendors, shuffled money from one hand to another, tried to keep the image polished on social media while cracks spread underneath. I imagined them in their Buckhead kitchen, sipping wine, snapping at assistants, never suspecting that the woman they had deemed unworthy of an invitation was the one holding the strings. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about patience. About letting them feel the weight of the walls closing in before the reveal. I carried myself through those days with a strange serenity. I walked the streets of Savannah, letting the sound of street musicians and the sight of moss-covered oaks steady me. I knew the storm was coming. I could feel it like the hush of a hospital hallway right before the ER doors burst open. And when the storm hit, I would be ready to step into the light. The day of the final walkthrough at the Azalea House dawned hot and sticky, the kind of southern heat that makes the air feel heavy against your skin. I wore my best dress, a soft navy blue with a white shawl, simple but dignified. I wasn't going there as a guest, not yet. I was going there as the one thing they never expected, the person who now held the weight of their perfect world in her hands. The grand doors of the venue opened into the marble foyer, where Kelsey, Deirdre, Jordan, and a scattering of planners stood huddled around clipboards and swatches of fabric. Their voices carried sharp and brittle like glass ready to crack. I stepped in quietly, the click of my shoes on the tile drawing their attention. Kelsey's eyes widened, her lips parting in confusion. Deirdre straightened, her smile turning thin and poisonous. Jordan's face. Oh, my poor boy, his face was a mixture of shock and shame. What are you doing here? Kelsey snapped, her voice slicing through the room. This is a private walkthrough. I reached into my leather folder, my hands steady as if I'd been preparing for this moment my entire life. You're right, I said calmly, my voice carrying through the hall. It is a private walkthrough, which is why I'm here. As lender of record. I laid the papers on the table, the bold heading of Abuela Sage Ulsi staring back at them. The room went silent. Even the wedding planner froze, her pen suspended midair. Deirdre was the first to speak, her voice low and sharp. What is this? These, I said, tapping the documents, are the loan agreements for the Azalea House. The mortgage was distressed. I purchased the note, which means legally, all major events must comply with lender approval, including your wedding. Kelsey's face drained of color. She stumbled over her words. You can't just, this isn't. Oh, but it is. I leaned closer, my voice steady, my eyes never leaving hers. I hold the note. I have the right to approve occupancy, layouts, and payments. And right now this event is in arrears. Vendors unpaid, sponsors withdrawn. Without lender approval, this wedding cannot move forward. The planner's face turned pale as she shuffled through her clipboard, whispering to herself. Jordan finally found his voice. Mom, what are you saying? I looked at him then, really looked at him the way a mother does when she wants her child to remember who raised him. I'm saying, Mijo, that I will not be erased. I carried you through life when no one else would. I will not stand outside the gates while strangers take my place at your side. If this wedding goes on, it will go on with me restored to the guest list, in the front row where a mother belongs. Deirdre's hand trembled as she gripped the back of a chair. This is blackmail, she hissed. I shook my head slowly. No. This is balance. You tried to erase me. Life gave me the pen to write myself back in. The room held its breath. Kelsey sputtered, her voice breaking. You're ruining everything. No, I said softly, almost tenderly. I'm saving what matters. Your vendors will be paid today. Your contracts will hold. Your venue will stand. But only if you accept one condition. My rightful place as Jordan's mother, present and honored. For a long moment no one moved. Then slowly the venue manager cleared his throat and said, She's right. Without lender approval, the wedding cannot proceed. His voice was apologetic but firm. Deirdre's face went pale. Kelsey looked as if the world had collapsed beneath her feet. And Jordan's eyes filled with tears, the kind of tears a man tries to swallow but can't. In that moment the power shifted. For the first time since this nightmare began, I stood not as the excluded, but as the one holding the key. And I let them feel it. Every ounce of it. The air in that marble foyer thickened as if the whole house itself was holding its breath. For a moment no one spoke. You could hear the faint whir of the ceiling fan above us, the shuffle of papers in the planner's hands, even the muffled laughter of vendors outside. But inside it was dead silent. Then Kelsey erupted. "You can't do this," she screamed, her perfectly curled hair trembling as she shook her head. "This is my day. My brand. You're hijacking everything." Her voice cracked, high and panicked, as though the walls she'd so carefully built around herself were caving in. Deirdre stepped forward, her pearls gleaming like a knight's armor, her lips curled into a sneer. "This is exactly why we didn't want you here, Rosa. She stopped herself, her words caught between insult and fury, then spat. "Classless. You can't buy respect. You'll never belong in our world." Her words stung sharper than I wanted them to. But I steadied myself, resting my hand on the leather folder as though it were a shield. My voice came out low and calm, the way it always did in the ER when everyone else was panicking. "I'm not here to buy respect, Deirdre. I'm here to claim dignity. You erased me. You sent emails calling me extended relations. I slid a printed copy across the table. And you revoked my invitation in the name of protecting a brand." I looked straight at her, then at Kelsey. "But a brand isn't a family. A brand doesn't stay up nights with a sick child, or sew clothes from scraps, or work double shifts so a boy can stand here today in a suit you didn't pay for." The silence cracked. Jordan's voice broke through, rough and uneven. "Mom." His eyes glistened and he looked down as if ashamed. "I didn't want it to happen this way. But I thought keeping the peace would make it easier." I turned to him, my heart aching. "Easier for who, Mijo? Easier for you to let them cut me out so you wouldn't have to raise your voice? I stood by you your whole life. All I asked was a seat to witness your happiness. And you let them erase me as though I never mattered." His face crumpled, the truth landing heavy. Kelsey's hands balled into fists. "You're manipulating him. No," I interrupted, my voice steady as stone. "I'm reminding him. I'm reminding all of you. I am his mother. That fact cannot be erased no matter how you rewrite your guest lists." The wedding planner, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. "Legally, Mrs. Delgado is correct. Without her approval, this event cannot proceed. And frankly, none of us are being paid until the arrears are cleared." She glanced nervously at me as though waiting for my cue. I nodded once. "They'll be paid today." I pulled out my checkbook, the paper crisp against my hands, and signed the amounts needed to steady the ship. My pen glided over the pages with a sense of finality. The sound of my signature echoed louder in that quiet room than any of their protests. Kelsey's mouth opened, then shut. Deirdre's shoulders stiffened, her face pale with disbelief. And Jordan, my sweet boy, looked at me as if he were seeing me clearly for the first time in years. The balance had shifted and they knew it. The mother they had tried to erase now held the very ground they stood on. But I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I only said the words that had been burning in my chest for weeks. "I won't ruin your day. I won't take away your joy. But I will not be erased. I will sit in the front row where I belong and watch my son begin his life. That is my condition. That is my right." And with that, the reckoning was sealed. That night, the rehearsal dinner shifted from Tybee Island back into a modest room at the Azalea House, stripped of its pretension. The air still carried the weight of what had unfolded earlier, but there was also a quiet unease, as if everyone knew the balance of power had changed and were learning how to walk on new ground. I arrived early, my quilt folded neatly in a box at my side. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like an outsider sneaking into a world that wasn't mine. I felt steady, like the roots of the oaks I had walked beneath all week, weathered but unshakable. Jordan found me in the courtyard before dinner began. His tie was loose, his face drawn, but his eyes searched for mine with the same look he had when he was a boy needing comfort. He held something small in his hand, a boutonniere of white roses and greenery. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking slightly, would you pin this on me?" The weight of that moment nearly buckled my knees. My hands trembled as I reached for the pin, the scent of fresh roses rising up. I slid it onto his lapel, my fingers brushing the fabric of his jacket the way they used to smooth down his little school uniform. His eyes welled up as he whispered, "I'm sorry. I should have fought harder for you." Tears stung my own eyes, but I shook my head gently. "You're here now, Mijo. That's enough." Inside, the dinner was quieter than I imagined it would be. The music was soft, the laughter subdued. Kelsey kept to herself for most of the evening, her face pale, her eyes flickering between me and Jordan like she wasn't sure where to place me in her story anymore. Finally, near the end of the night, she approached me. Her voice was small, almost fragile. "Mrs. Delgado," she began, twisting her napkin in her hands, I didn't mean for things to go this far. I thought I was protecting our day. But I hurt you. And I see that now." I studied her carefully, weighing her words. She wasn't warm, not yet. But the edge of her arrogance had dulled, replaced with something closer to fear, or maybe respect. "I don't want to be your enemy, Kelsey," I said softly. "I only want to stand where a mother belongs. Nothing more. Nothing less." She nodded, swallowing hard. "We'll make room. In the front row." It wasn't forgiveness, not fully. But it was a step, a fragile bridge stretched over a broken river. And sometimes a fragile bridge is enough to cross. Before the night ended, Jordan asked if I would meet him privately the morning of the wedding. "Just you and me, Mom," he said. "Before everything begins." I agreed, my heart swelling. That promise meant more to me than any polished toast or curated guest list. It was the recognition I had been starved of, that I mattered, that my place wasn't a favor but a truth. As I walked back to my motel that night, the streets of Savannah glistened under lamplight, the air thick with jasmine and the sound of crickets. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt peace stirring inside me. Not a full peace, but the beginning of it, like the faint blush of dawn before the sun breaks over the horizon. The wedding hadn't come yet, but my seat was waiting, and with it a piece of my dignity restored. The morning of the wedding rose golden over Forsyth Park, the fountain spraying mist into the warm air, the scent of gardenias heavy around me. Savannah's charm felt softer that day, as though the city itself had decided to bear witness. Jordan kept his promise. Before the ceremony, he met me under a canopy of moss-draped oaks. The early light filtered through the branches, speckling his suit with patches of gold. He held me in his arms, and for a moment he wasn't a groom, wasn't a man torn between loyalties. He was my boy again, the one I'd rocked through fevers, the one who once whispered, "Don't let go, Mama." "I almost lost you," he murmured, his voice tight with regret. "You almost let me go," I whispered back. Then I pulled away and cupped his face in my hands. "But you didn't. Remember that. From this day forward, don't let anyone erase the people who built you." He nodded, eyes wet, and kissed my forehead before walking off to take his place. When the ceremony began, I sat in the front row, exactly where I belonged. The quilt, my gift, lay draped over my lap, its patches glowing under the morning sun. As the music swelled and Jordan stood waiting at the altar, I felt something loosen inside me. I wasn't watching from the shadows. I wasn't erased. I was present. Kelsey walked down the aisle, her face pale but composed. When her eyes met mine, I saw no warmth, but neither did I see the scorn that once lived there. There was something else, an acknowledgement, perhaps, that I had claimed my place not with venom, but with steady hands and unwavering love. The vows were spoken, the rings exchanged, and when the officiant declared them husband and wife, the applause rose around me like a tide. I clapped too, my hands steady, my heart both heavy and light. Later, at the reception in the Azalea House, I signed papers with the venue owner, arranging for him to refinance so he could keep his business. My power had never been about destroying them. It was about restoring myself. About showing that dignity doesn't come from permission. It comes from claiming what is already yours. As I watched Jordan dance with his bride, I didn't feel victorious. I felt balanced. Justice had been served not with revenge, but with presence. I had shown them that love, when tested, is not easily erased. And when the night ended, I walked out beneath the glowing lanterns, the cicadas singing in the trees, my heart at peace. My place as Jordan's mother was intact. My dignity was whole again. Sometimes justice doesn't come with thunder or fire. Sometimes it comes quietly, like the steady heartbeat of a woman who refused to be silenced. And that's where my story closes. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.